Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Happy Sunday. Crossing the Red Sea and gathering manna. There's more than enough milk and honey. There's more than enough in the land of milk and honey. Our theme for this month is inspired by the classic Catherine Ponder. Who's read Catherine Ponder? Okay, Catherine Ponder book. It's called The Millionaire Moses. And if you remember from last Sunday, we sourced the origins of the term land of milk and honey from Exodus. And that's, of course, in the Bible. Extra points if you know how far into the Bible it is, right? Which book is it?
Second.
Oh, very good. It is the promise God made to Moses from the burning bush regarding the Israelites who were enslaved in Egypt. It reads, "And the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and I have heard their cry because of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows, and I've come down to deliver them out of the hands of the Egyptians, and to bring them out of that land to a good and large land, to a land flowing with milk and honey." So each week this month, we're revealing and exploring the metaphysical code contained in the Exodus experience of Moses and the Israelites. We're exploring the consciousness that is required to live in our own personal land of milk and honey, because it's really all about consciousness. That's where it all begins, right? In our minds, what we're conscious of. The land of milk and honey really isn't a place to get to or conditions to experience, but rather it's a state of mind or consciousness. And when we come from that consciousness, the land will then appear in our lives. So I'm really excited this month to be delving into the prosperity secrets of Moses and unveiling the mysteries that Moses knew for creating the consciousness that really it's as applicable to us here in 2016 as it was 3,500 years ago. Just like the prayer for our country is still applicable that was, said in 1953 by Ernest Holmes. It's amazing. So truth is the truth is the truth. So not only are they applicable now, but they are vital right now, because we are at a time in evolution in humankind where we need to basically fish or cut bait. You've heard that expression, right? And we have to do that about our prosperity consciousness, right? As I said last week, it's time that we finally mastered this one. How many of us have been working on this for a long time? It's time that we finally master it so that we can get on to some more important things, like expressing the brilliance of God that we are, of spirit that we are, like sharing our gifts, being able to be out there to share what we came here to share, like having a hand in making this a world that works for everyone, because we all have a part in that. Those things are a heck of a lot easier to do when we have an abundant flow of financial resources in our lives, right? Right? Yeah, okay, I'm glad you agree. So, we're spending 4 weeks looking at some ancient codes and practices to master this prosperity consciousness thing. Today, we're going to look at the consciousness lessons learned basically contained in the two miracles that occurred in the third 40-year period of Moses' life. 40, which represents what? It means all the time, 40 years, all the time that it takes for transformation. Last week we learned that Moses had 3 such periods of transformation. The first 40 years were spent in Egypt as the son of Pharaoh, where 2 important things happened. Who was listening last week? What did they happen when he was living with the Pharaoh? First, he learned and became accustomed to opulence. He got very comfortable living in the land of luxury there, having all of the good and wonderful things being provided for him. And second, he learned the great secret of manifesting, which was, what's the great secret of manifesting? Substance is the key to all abundance. Substance is the key to all abundance. The second 40 years were spent in the Midian desert, where he connected to, for the first time, the God of his being, and he listened to that inner voice. And it's where we get the great lesson of the great I am that I am. And the final 40 years in the wilderness is where he demonstrated and taught all that he had learned despite challenges, obstacles, and setbacks. So if you weren't here last week, guess what? I actually updated the website. It's on there, so you can catch up if you want to. Today we're going to focus on some of the prosperity lessons learned in the wilderness period, the final period, the famous period. And we're going to delve right into that. So right at the outset of their move from bondage and slavery to freedom and abundance, the Israelites needed two seemingly impossible things to occur. These two miracles will be our context for what we're talking about today. First, when the Pharaoh changed his mind about letting them go and sent his army after them, okay, are you all picturing the movie we've all seen, right? They met a huge obstacle in their attempt to get away. What was it? That's right, of course, the vast body of water called the Red Sea. Yipes. Has anybody seen that movie set at Universal Studios? I saw that as a teenager, and quite a miracle of engineering, how they made that happen for the movie. Of course, not quite a miracle as God did, but the thing that was interesting is that you think today in our technology, they would just do it all on a computer. So it's kind of interesting how far we've come with that, but I digress. Anyway, the Israelites' options were to walk into the sea, because they didn't stand at the edge and wait for it to be parted. Their options were to walk into the sea and surely drown, or stay and surely be killed by the Egyptians. And this was the first miracle that they needed. Second, assuming that the first miracle actually occurred and they escaped the Egyptians, now what? Great, you get away, now what? They would need to have enough food and water to sustain them on their journey, and who knew how long this journey was going to be. So now listen to this. This is kind of interesting. According to the calculations made by the U.S. Army's Quartermaster General, who apparently doesn't have enough to do, Moses would have needed 1,500 tons of food each day to feed the Israelites. 1,500 tons of food. Think about that. To bring that much food in for one day, it would have taken 2 freight trains at least a mile long. Of course, there were no freight trains at that time, so that couldn't have happened. So now what about the water? We have to have water to survive. If they only had enough to drink and wash a few dishes, it would have taken 11 million gallons each day in a freight train, which didn't exist, and with tank cars that would have gone 1,800 miles long to bring the water. That's a heck of a lot. Clearly, in the physical realm, it was impossible to escape from the Egyptians. And it was equally impossible to have enough sustenance to sustain them, even if they did. Yet, they did escape from the Egyptians, and they did have plenty of food and water. Obviously, they survived. And they had enough for a journey that really turned out to be much, much longer than anybody ever anticipated. So let's look at these two miracles and what they have to teach us about building our land of milk and honey consciousness. And I'm going to do them in reverse order. First, we're going to talk about gathering the manna, and then we're going to go back to the crossing of the Red Sea. So gathering manna. Catherine Ponder, in her book, Millionaire Moses, defines the word manna as any needed sustenance that seems miraculously supplied. Okay. And she writes, anytime you have a challenge in your life, especially in a financial form, you need to know how to meet that need by gathering manna. When you learn how to, your need is often supplied in as miraculous a way as were the needs of the Hebrews during this wilderness experience. She suggests a number of ways that we can put ourselves in the position of gathering our manna, and we're going to look at 3 of them. First, you gather your manna by speaking forth definite, rich words of supply, even and especially in the face of apparent lack. So we've got to be definite in our words. Our words are our power. Ponder writes, one of the quickest ways to gather your manna is by calling on the divine substance through repeated prosperity decrees spoken aloud. This stirs up the wealth of the universe and causes it to be manifested for you in the appropriate form. So get clear and speak clearly. Remember our conversation last Sunday about the definition of substance according to Wallace Wattles in his book, The Science of Getting Rich. He writes, everything we see on earth is made of one original substance, out of which all things proceed. New things are constantly being made, and older ones are dissolving, but all are made out of one thing. There is no limit to this formless substance. The spaces in, through, and between the forms of the visible universe are permeated and filled with this original substance, the raw material of all things. 10,000 times as much has been made and might still be made and would still not have exhausted the supply of the universal raw material. The formless substance is alive and is always impelled toward more life. So what is substance? What is substance? Substance is God. Substance is universal energy, source. It's whatever you call it, what is comfortable for you to call it. And it is before taking form as form and in ever-changing forms. It's always fluid, it's always moving. And we form substance through what? Our thoughts, our consciousness. We have that power. There's nothing new about the practice of speaking affirmations of truth. People have been doing it forever, even when they didn't know they were doing it, right? For centuries, people have mystically gathered manna by dwelling upon thoughts of substance. Moses spent the first 40 years of his life learning this secret, teaching in Egypt. Then he spent another 40 years meditating upon it in the Midian desert. Then during the last 40 years, he proved it to himself and his followers. So don't worry, if you don't have immediate results from your words, it took Moses 80 years to get this down, right? But as you work these principles, it can happen, and happen a lot quicker than that. I think when we first discovered this teaching, man, we were making things manifest right and left, and it was amazing. And did anybody else have that experience when you first came upon this teaching? It's like, oh wow, this stuff really works. So the idea, though, is to keep it going, right? And if it's not working, it may be because we speak our definite, rich words of supply through affirmations and or affirmative prayer for a few minutes each day, and then we spend the rest of the day negating them. Who does that? I know I do sometimes, yes. I love the passage from Science of Mind founder Ernest Holmes. He writes this in the Love and Law chapter. He says, we cannot make affirmations for 15 minutes and spend the other 23 hours and 45 minutes denying the thing we have affirmed and affirming the thing we have denied and obtain the results that we seek. We send out our word and it sets in motion the power, but if we begin to think the opposite thing, it neutralizes our word, wow, and destroys any and all possibility of its effect. Wow, that's powerful. I just see that like laser thing just shooting and blowing it up. You know, here we put all this effort into creating, you know, the image of what we want to create, and then we just zap it right out. But if we really stick with it, miracles do occur because we are that powerful. So number 2, gather your manna by using something close at hand to meet your needs. I've said it this way: do all you can with what you have where you are. That's all we can do, right? All we have is this present moment. This morning I want to rearrange it a bit and add an addendum to it. Do all you can where you are with what you have, and you always have more than you know. So often we don't gather our good because we don't realize the resources, internal and external, that we already have. This is where counting our blessings truly comes in. We always have more than we know. And that's how our needs really are met, is when we realize what we have already and give thanks for that. Catherine Ponder suggests that we begin by saying, Divine Substance, show me how to gather my manna. Lead me to the abundance at hand. Show me how to use it and how to multiply it. You may want to get a different job, so give your full self to the one that you already have. You may want to start to be a philanthropist, right? So start giving in small ways. Find a way to do that. We have to start where we are with what we have. So number 3, gather your manna by doing something fearless. Our third idea for gathering manna is to do something that may be a bit terrifying to you, right? Which takes us directly to crossing that Red Sea, which is also our second miracle point this morning. So this practice really is doing double duty. So let's look what it means to be crossing your Red Sea. I've heard it said that when you are only willing to do what is easy, life will be hard. But when you are willing to do what is hard, life will get easy. And what are the hardest things that we have to do? What are the hardest things that we have to do? They're the things that we fear, right? Getting that spider. Oh, well, we were clearing out an old pool toy, and I think there must have been 10,000 black widows, at least, maybe 20. I'm sure there were 5. But anyway, it seemed like that many. Yeah, and it was like we were afraid. We didn't want to deal with that, but it had to be dealt with, and we did. We took care of it. When Jehovah, the God within Moses' inner guidance system, which he connected with in his second 40 period, when Jehovah told Moses he was to go to Pharaoh and demand freedom for the Hebrews, how do you think Moses felt? He was afraid, right? And he had an excuse, and a pretty darned excuse at that time. I have an impediment. I'm not a very good speaker. Whew. What are our excuses? But our fears disguised as reasons. What are our excuses, but our fears disguised as reasons? But God is always, always, always with us to help us move through those fears. This is symbolized by God sending Moses' brother Aaron to help. The name Aaron stands for strength. Isn't that beautiful? It took great strength for Moses to appear repeatedly before Pharaoh, asking for freedom, especially when his requests were not being granted. But by having to do what he feared a number of times by speaking the words of freedom over and over, which is the first way to gather a manna, Moses gained the inner strength that he would need later. Not only to get the Hebrews out of bondage, but to keep them out. When you do something you are afraid of, you build your inner strength. You gain inner strength. When you are afraid, yet you do something anyway, you break through an invisible wall that has kept you small and weak and perhaps broke. So here's something that's really, really important to know. Nothing happened. Nothing happened. The Red Sea did not part. The miracle did not happen until the Hebrews did something fearless. And what was that? They had to walk into the sea. Wow. Think about that. They had to walk. They had to be fully committed before the miracle happened. Nothing happened as they stood merely looking at it from a distance, waiting for it to part, and then thinking that when it did, then they would go through it and get to the dry land. No, at Moses' command, they went forward right into the unparted sea. And it is only then that it parted. They did the fearless thing, and then the sea parted. I think that is such an important point to get. When challenges confront you, don't run from them. Don't try to avoid them. Don't get all excited about them. Or as I like to say in a very unministerial-like way, don't get your panties in a bunch, right? Simply face them and move forward. Face them and move forward. The prosperity lesson here is that challenge will divide and will open up for you. The challenge will divide and will open up for you. You will pass through it, divinely protected to your new good. Perhaps you're trying to cross a Red Sea of financial difficulties right now. Perhaps you're in need of gathering manna. If so, do this fearless act. Are you ready? You ready to do a fearless act? Everybody? All right, good. Get a mental image, an idea of the challenge. Everybody think about it just for a second. Think of something that may be holding you back, a challenge right now. Now face it square in the face and say, "You do not scare me." Say that with me. You do not scare me. Then stretch forth your great rod of power by saying, eyes closed, hand on heart, "Divine substance is the one and only reality
Divine substance is the one and only reality.
Divine substance is doing its bountiful work here and now.
Divine substance is doing its bountiful work here and now.
I use what I have
I use what I have
to multiply my good.
to multiply my good.
Knowing this,
Knowing this,
I have fearless faith
I have fearless
that
faith
every need is now met.
that every need is now met.
Knowing this,
Knowing this,
I have fearless faith
I have fearless faith
that every need is now met.
that every need is now met.
Knowing this,
Knowing this,
I have fearless faith
I have fearless faith
that every need is now met.
that every need is now met.
All right, so with your eyes still closed and hands still over your heart, breathe in the energy of faith right now. Breathe in the energy of divine substance. God in the great unformed, right here, right now. Feel it. Bring it completely into the very beingness of your heart. And again in this moment, once again, get a picture of whatever financial situation you may be facing right now that perhaps may have frightened you. And say powerfully but softly, "You don't scare me."
You don't scare me.
And repeat after me again, powerfully but softly. Divine substance is the one and only reality.
Divine substance is the one and only reality.
Divine substance is doing its bountiful work here and now.
Divine substance is doing its bountiful work here and now.
I use what I have
I use what I have
to multiply my good.
to multiply my good.
Knowing this,
Knowing this,
I have fearless faith
I have fearless faith
that every need is now met.
that every need is now met.
Knowing this,
Knowing this,
I have fearless faith
I have fearless faith
that every need is now met.
that every need is now met.
Knowing this,
Knowing this,
I have fearless faith
I have fearless faith
that every need is now met.
that every need is now met.
And so it is.
So it is.